Today's lecture is part of a month-long series of several events called the Rusalka Festival, related to the new production of Dvořák's opera Rusalka in the Metropolitan Opera. Several organizations have worked together to create these events, including the Czech Center and its director Barbara Karpetová, who is in the back, please sir. The Consulate General of the Czech Republic and Consul General Martin Dvořák, who unfortunately could not be here today, the National Museum of the Czech Republic, the National Theatre in Prague, the Harmony Foundation, and the Metropolitan Opera. On the second floor of the Bohemian National Hall of this hall is a rare exhibition of original scores, artifacts, letters, and René Fleming's costumes from the Metropolitan Opera related to the opera Rusalka. In addition, in the Dvořák room on this floor, we have an exhibition entitled Mythic Bohemia, Dvořák's Villa and Lake Rusalka, a photographic presentation curated by Daha's Maida Kalap-Whittaker. Maida? You can see both of these exhibits after this evening's lecture. Tonight, Daha is proud to present Professor Michael Beckerman, who will deliver a lecture entitled Tristan und Rusalka. Michael Beckerman is Carol and Milton Petrie Chair of Collegiate Professor of Music at New York University and the Leonard Bernstein Scholar in Residence at the New York Philharmonic for the 2016 and 17 season. He has written many studies and several books on Czech music topics, including New Walls of Dvořák, Dvořák and His World, Janáček and His World, Janáček as Theorist, and Martinu's Mysterious Accident, as well as articles on subjects such as Mozart, Brahms, film scoring, music of the Roma, exiled composers, and music in the camps. He has been a frequent contributor to the New York Times and was a regular guest on Live from Lincoln Center and other radio and television programs in the United States, Europe, and Japan. Dr. Beckerman lectures nationally and internationally and has organized many concerts and symposia. He is a recipient of the Dvořák Medal and the Janáček Medal of the from the Czech Ministry of Culture, and is also a laureate of the Czech Music Council. He has received twice the Dean Taylor Award. Chair of the New York University Department of Music from 2004 to 2013, he served as Distinguished Professor at Lancaster University from 2011 to 2015. And last year, received an honorary doctorate from Palacký University in the Czech Republic. It is my honor and privilege to present to you Professor Michael Beckerman.
If I were an athlete, this would be my home court. There's no place in the world that I feel more at home as a lecturer or as a performer or as a member of the audience. As I was waiting to go on, I strolled into the Dvořák room. And it was such a pleasure to see that over many years, I think thanks to Maida and Susan and so many others, and Barbara, we've turned this place into a kind of a home for Dvořák and for us, and for all kinds of programs, lectures, concerts, all kinds of events go on in this place. And again, it's a genuine treat to be here. My title, Tristan und Rusalka, of course refers to a link between Wagner's famous opera and Rusalka. There are many, and I'll talk about them, but Rusalka presents somewhat of a slightly vexing problem, because it would be completely wrong to say that Rusalka hasn't made it. Rusalka is performed widely. There are many different productions, and yet one has a feeling, and perhaps one's being grateful that the work is performed as often as it is. But one has a sense that it is occupying a kind of niche in the cultural ecosystem of charming ethnic fairy tale, rather than the full-blown tragedy that it is. And that Rusalka, I actually thought the review in the New York Times paid more attention to that aspect of it, but that even though there is great charm to Rusalka, and of course there is a fairy tale element, it is one of the most powerful works that has ever been put on the stage. And I'd like to talk about it in the context of Tristan and Isolde, but also on its own. So I'm going to speak about a couple of things, but I'd like to start with a story that I always find amusing and somewhat puzzling. So Dvorak became very friendly with the conductor, Anton Seidl, and they were both apparently extraordinarily reticent. And it's told that they would spend hours together drinking a beer, again at Luchow's or any of the other establishments in New York, not saying a word, and when they finally parted, they would thank each other for the brilliant and scintillating conversation they enjoyed. But they did speak a bit about Wagner, and it was known that Dvorak loved Tannhäuser, particularly the overture to Tannhäuser. And he was chatting with Seidl and said, well, have you seen Siegfried? It's playing at the opera, you must go. And Dvorak went, and he went with Kovařík, his sort of assistant, amanuensis. And we know that he went because Kovařík wrote it up in his diary. And apparently, Dvorak was just not comfortable. He wasn't comfortable there. He didn't feel he was dressed right. He thought he might have come too early. And then they left after the first act. It's not clear why. At one point, Dvorak said, well, you know, Siegfried is filled with this rhythm. And that Dvorak said it was too much of that rhythm. But I think it really encapsulates Dvorak's relationship to Wagner. He admired Wagner very much, but was also quite intimidated by him. And this in-again, out-again relationship with Wagner is something we can trace from the very beginning. So tonight I'll try to make the following points. First of all, that Dvorak was heavily influenced by Wagner at certain times. That there are certain obvious similarities between Tristan and Rusalka. That part of the musical plot of Rusalka borrows something from Tristan in the sense that there's a kind of pulsing undertow of leitmotifs that continue throughout the opera, but that it also differs in that in Dvorak's case, the arias emerge from this texture, as I'll suggest, in the very same way that Rusalka and Vodnik emerge from the waters. That the final scene of the opera, which to me is really one of the spectacular scenes in all opera, draws on certain aspects of Tristan and yet moves in different kinds of directions. And finally, again, that far from being a Czech fairy tale, Rusalka really deserves to be spoken about, along with the Tristan and Romeo and Juliet, La Traviata, as works of the deepest tragedy and extraordinary depth. So let me begin just to introduce the fact that from a young age, Dvorak was very much aware of Wagner. We know that Dvorak was a violist in Smetana's orchestra in the Provisional Theater. Dvorak wrote about the time that Wagner came to town and just how amazed he was and how much he admired him. And even that he and maybe another student secretly followed Wagner all over town. But Dvorak was much too shy, or at least he said he was much too shy to introduce himself to Wagner. Dvorak, it's well known at the beginning of his career, was very much influenced by Wagner's music in Tristan. If you look at things like the early D major string quartet, you'll notice that the first movement is 24 minutes long. So, you know, this piece is an hour-long string quartet. When you think of the length of Mozart and Haydn's and even Beethoven's, this is a gargantuan work. So for a while, both in his symphonies, particularly the Third Symphony, some of his early operatic work, and certainly these early string quartets, he's thinking about Tristan and Wagner and modeling his work on Wagner. As I mentioned once, that if you read Dvorak's biographies, Wagnerism is treated as if it's a disease from which Dvorak is recovering. And you'll read, and after he finished the string quartets in the 1860s, he no longer was interested in Wagner. And then you read 1875, interested in Wagner again, and then he's recovering from Wagner, and then he goes back and forth. So again, I think there's this fascinating ambivalence, a sense of Wagner's power and his love for the music, and at the same time, perhaps like all artists, wary of certain kinds of influences that might be too strong. Now, there are obvious similarities between Tristan and Rusalka in various ways. I mean, both feature a solo male voice in the first act. In the case of Tristan, it's sort of the helmsman, and it's the hunter in Rusalka, so we have sort of parallels there. Both of them feature a potion, a magic potion, as one of the critical ingredients of the opera, that the very tensions that end up creating these marvelous moments, particularly in the final act, are sort of acts of magic. Whether it's Yeji Baba or somebody mixing a magic potion, getting the potions mixed up in Tristan. These seem like lame plot devices, but of course they end up creating astonishing tension. And of course, finally, they both have a kind of love-death, a Liebestod, that are really two of the extraordinary scenes in the literature. So what I'd like to do first in terms of the music is, again, introduce some of Dvorak's musical style. There are ways in which Dvorak is similar to Wagner in this opera, in his use of motives, and again, this sort of texture underneath everything which keeps floating in the orchestra, introducing various motives one after the other. But I'd like to even start by saying one of the things that Brahms said rather critically about Dvorak. It's well known that Brahms really loved Dvorak. He loved him as a person. It seems famously invited Dvorak. If you come to Vienna, he said, I will make my personal fortune yours. And of course, it's known that Brahms was enormously wealthy. So he really felt almost paternal towards Dvorak. He loved his music. He found his music fascinating. If anybody criticized Dvorak, Brahms said things like, hey, listen, the stuff that he throws in the wastebasket, you could use as main themes in your work. Don't put this guy down. But he's been writing about the Eighth Symphony. And he said, there's too much, there's all these unbelievably beautiful things, but nothing's ever sustained, nothing ever you can't tell what the main idea is. And I think that sort of represents Brahms's aesthetic, but I think it represents also a genuine critical weakness in Brahms, because it seems to me that one of Dvorak's amazing strengths, along the lines of Mozart, is the only composer I can think of who's comparable in this way, of being able to combine in a short space many, many different ideas and dialects which somehow go together. What I'd like to do is illustrate using the famous Song to the Moon and then the Vodnik's aria in the second act to sort of illustrate how he puts this together. Now, again, the Song to the Moon is one of probably the most famous song in Czech opera, certainly in Rusalka. And the idea, of course, is that a young, I don't know what this is. This is a mermaid. I thought I should have that here. A water nymph, someone who is part fish and part human, or some creature in between, has fallen in love with a mortal. Again, this is based on a couple of different stories, De la Montfouquet, and of course, most famously, The Little Mermaid of Hans Christian Andersen. And she is filled with longing And what begins as a kind of soft pulsing of the waters, the harp sounds, impressionist shimmer, works itself up into one of the great erotic frenzies in opera. But Dvorak doesn't really do it seamlessly, even though we experience it as seamless. He has very different ideas that come one after the other. The first is what I call death and magic sleep. It's this kind of sound. Hear this kind of descent, and again, there's a lot of descent, D-E-S-C, not D-I-S-S, in this opera, particularly in the final scene. It seems that everything is being pulled down. So after this, we get something completely different. We get the harp, and the harp both suggests a kind of watery shimmer. But harps in 19th century music, and even particularly in Czech 19th century music, herald the beginning of the story. The bardic harp begins to strum, and the story begins. So here's how it sounds in Rusalka. Most famous opening in Czech music, the opening of Vyšehrad, the beginning of Vlast. Again, the bard telling the story of the nation. Dvorak uses this in his rhapsodies. So again, we have the magic sleep, followed directly by the harp. And then we have another kind of sound, this. So that sound of, sound world. Then we get over that Rusalka's special motive. I don't have the courage to count how many times one hears this motive in the opera, but it's into the hundreds really. And there are probably between 40 and 50, depending on how you slice and dice it, variants of this Rusalka motive. Haven't even gotten really to the aria yet. So here the aria begins, and again we get this, you'll hear this sound. Sorry, it's a little fuzzy. It's got the little outdoor hum sound. And so this idyllic moment that, so again, here's what it sounds like. So that sound world of the pastoral is again very much a part of the effect of Rusalka. And the pastorals are all over the place. And that's Dvorak's Czech suite. Smetana's Martyred Bride. Everything will come to a stop and you'll hear a kind of little pastoral. And a little bagpipe tune. Here's another. From Dvorak's tone poem, the New World Symphony, famously, you know. So these pastorals are very much a part of Dvorak's style, and we hear it at the beginning, but we also hear something else which is odd, which he throws in, I think, sort of sneaks in, and it's this. It's modal, or Dvorak, like. So these kinds of old archaic modal sounds, and it's just a little tweak. It's just a little, a hint of it, and yet it sort of gives alters slightly the character of this pastoral. Now, pastorals are nice and pretty because you know, the way to talk about a pastoral as it was in the beginning is now and forever shall be. Amen. Nothing changes in the world of the pastoral. It's always ideal. It's always perfect. The sun is always shining. The birds are always chirping. Well, that's a pastoral, but what about romance? Well, romance is a problem, you see, because as you may know, and you may have noticed, romance sort of shakes up the idyllic. Because romance craves a certain kind of union. And so even though this piece begins with this beautiful, simple pastoral, it sort of works itself up into something that's more intense, a little more dissonant, and not so content to stay in one place. By the way, for those of you who aren't familiar, basically the conceit of this aria, the basic story of it, is the simple idea of this beautiful sort of young woman who's fallen madly in love, speaking to the moon, as we all have done, because she knows that her lover is also looking at the same moon, and by speaking to the moon, she can talk to the moon can speak to her lover. That's sort of the charming conceit of this. So she begins with the pastoral saying, moon up in the sky, you know, sort of talking about it. But now she's talking about her lover. simple pastoral is interrupted by this yearning, which threatens to destroy it. And of course, why does it threaten to destroy it? Well, I don't have to tell you what it is that lovers want. That is something that is unstable. And of course, we get the slice of that instability in the next part of the aria, which is probably the most famous part. Wait for a moment and tell me where my lover is. And so we have these wonderful chords. But we might think we're going to get this sort of unexpected bright inflection, which sort of is magical. It's a magical moment. Along with the leaps and these chords, that it's, again, a pure, unexpected, magical moment of erotic longing. It's immediately followed by what I call all-purpose 19th century spooky music. I mean, I guess also spooky music is the opposite of the pastoral, right? So the pastoral is, and spooky music. So it's unstable. You don't know what's going to happen next. And so all of these are in the same aria, and then we get a final speech where she says, "Don't go away, moon, don't go away." Spooky. Rusalka motive. Don't go away. Now, you may have noticed if you went to see Rusalka that generally nobody applauds after this aria. And it's not because they don't like it. It's because of the way Dvorak has composed it to go directly into the following music by having these continuous motives underneath. And I was sort of searching for an image to give you a sense of how I sort of see this and understand it. And I asked a former student and friend of mine, Miriam Frank, to sort of help me draw it. And so here's what we came up with. So this is, again, this is sort of the sea of motives. And out of it rises the aria. And I'll just play the beginning of it so you can hear the whole thing together. But, so, imagine with spooky music at the end. have this quasi-Wagnerian base with all these motives percolating, and over it you have something that Wagner doesn't do, which is to write arias that are like this. Just here's another visual, just for anybody who likes something else, that these are what I would call the different parts, the different death, the ninth, the pastoral, so that Dvorak, again, like Mozart, has figured out, maybe not to Brahms' satisfaction, but to mine, and to many satisfaction of many others, how to combine all these unlike things and somehow make it a whole. Now, I think he does it in a way that's even perhaps more extreme and extraordinary in the second act. One of the problematics of Rusalka for some people is, as you know, well, you know, the Little Mermaid has to give up her voice. But when we read the story of the Little Mermaid, we can know what she's thinking. So for us as readers, she hasn't lost her voice. It's just that she's thinking instead of speaking. But what about in music, right? That the very essence of opera is singing. So how do you take voice away from the lead character? And you know, some have thought of this as something wrong with the opera. To me, it's one of the astonishing strengths of the opera. And to me, one of the glorious arias in this opera is in the second act, when the water sprite, who's kind of a father figure to her, maybe not her actual father, we're not sure, we're never told, but the water sprite, who's somewhat of a kind of, you know, he's kindly to her, or does his best. He keeps saying, poor pale Rusalka, alas, uboha. But he is a monster to others who are frightened of him. But he appears in the middle of the second act as Rusalka has, again, if you haven't seen The Little Mermaid lately, Rusalka falls in love with the prince, makes her Faustian deal with Yezhi-Baba the witch, that Yezhi-Baba will turn her into something like a human, although not quite human because she has to give up her voice. And the deal is that if she wins the prince's love, everything's going to be fine. But if the prince betrays her, she will be lost forever. She will become a wraith who must wander the world forever without peace. To make it even worse, she will be something like a femme fatale, but a literal one. So if she touches someone, if she kisses someone, that person will die. And so the second act, we see preparations for a wedding ceremony, but we understand that the prince and Rusalka are not getting along, that the prince doesn't understand why she's so cold looking, why she's so pale, why she can't speak. And of course, his love, at least momentarily, is going to be stolen away by a character known only as the foreign princess, and musically represented by a polonaise. Perhaps this has led some, and maybe with some, right, to have viewed this opera as a kind of metaphor for the Habsburg Empire, where Rusalka represents the Czechs, and the Habsburgs are represented by the prince. So, what sweet music do I hear? And so there are many interpretations. At any rate, at one of the key moments where Rusalka believes she is completely lost, who should appear but the vodnik, the water sprite, her father figure. And he sings this extremely heartbreaking aria about that she's lost herself in this horrible web of humans. You know, I suppose if you're carrying the Habsburg metaphor further, that you know, the Czechs have lost themselves in trying to accommodate Vienna and the German-speaking world. At any rate, it begins with a series of motives that you'll recognize. I think this is a little loud, so maybe we want to turn this down just a touch. The end of the wedding, or the Polish wedding. Now that motive, boom, 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 it occurs, some would say it is actually the most important motive in the opera. It's hard to outdo the Rusalka motive, but this boom, 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 boom some have considered it a motive associated with frustrated love. It first appears in Dvorak's works in his Second Symphony, at a time when some scholars have argued he was frustrated because he had fallen in love with Josefina Černáková. He ended up marrying her sister, but he was very much in love with her and she rejected him. And so some have said this motive in the Second Symphony he always associated with the frustrations of love. At any rate, as we'll see, it plays an important role in this opera, particularly in the last scene. Okay, so you know what this is. Alas, alas. And then death, sleep music. Lost in the earthly, in this worldly place. And then the aria proper begins, but it's actually, I think, one of the strangest things Dvorak's ever written. Suddenly it's in E minor, and to me, again, I call it Gregorian because it sounds like a little piece of chant or something like that. So again, it's this odd thing. Spooky. So this kind of odd, weird sound, and then it's followed immediately by a kind of pastoral. And then with a very florid finish. And that's followed by something that also seems to have no connection to. I mean, it's again, like sometimes you find in Mozart. Again, one of my favorite examples is this sonata. And then, first Mozart, then Bach. Little Children's March. So, I mean, you go from one to another, like every 4 measures, you're on a different planet. And yet Mozart is like Dvorak, is able to somehow match these unlike things. So after this weird Gregorian thing, followed by an unexpected pastoral, you get a full-throated love song, as if the love song that Rusalka cannot sing herself. And then it ends with one of the most gorgeous instrumental passages I think Dvorak wrote. I call it lament, I don't know what else to call it. It's kind of a commentary on, you've exhausted the capability of language to express this grief that he feels for her. sounds sort of like stolen from Mascagni or something like that, from Leoncavallo or Italian opera. And then it ends with a little kind of recitation, as does the aria to the moon. So this motive is this frustrated love motive, but very quickly. So I'll just play it once again. Water sprite, which I put down at the bottom for your reference. But again, I'll just play a little bit so you can hear it together. It's rather short. Again, Gregorian. Lament. And the frustrated love motive. So again, these arias sort of emerge out of this sea of motives and then subside into them and emerge again. So again, it explains why nobody applauds, right? They're not applause lines. It's a kind of Wagnerian continuity, but does things that Wagner never would dream of doing, could never have done. And again, particularly in this combination of creating powerful effects by combining things that don't belong together, only he figures out how to make them belong together. So I want to move now to the last scene, because the last scene is the love-death scene. Again, the balance of the opera is extraordinary. In the first act, it's Rusalka's desperate longing for the prince that captures our attention. The prince sees her and falls in love, but his love is of a kind of ardent, insensitive, cat-like, princely love. And he's not a bad guy. I don't think he didn't like get in this whole bet with the witch, and he doesn't know about the supernatural. He doesn't know he's falling in love with somebody who's not going to be able to speak. But he falls in love with her, and they go off happily to the palace. The second act is the reversal of fortune act, where gradually Rusalka and the audience realize that she's doomed, that she's not going to have the prince. The prince falls in love with a foreign princess, rejects Rusalka, and she understands that her life is over. She's not going to make it on planet Earth or in the palace, and has to return to her own world, but now as a kind of reviled, toxic substance that no one can touch and no one can play with. And despite the sympathies of the water sprite, of the vodnik, there's nothing that can she's offered a way out, which is very much like the magic flute. When the Queen of the Night shows up and tries to get Pamina to kill Sarastro with a knife. So Yeji Baba the witch says, well, there's only one way you can get rid of this. You can, with human blood, if you kill him, get the blood. And Dvorak was a bit ghoulish in his way. He'd written these rather ghoulish tone poems before, so this is nothing. Little princely blood is nothing by this point. And of course, Rusalka is still in love with the prince who rejects it. But now the balance has been restored in a weird way, because it's the prince who feels precisely the way Rusalka felt in the first act. A love that's too out of control, too passionate. He literally cannot live without her, will go mad without her. And so he runs into the forest and finds her again. Now, this last act, this last scene, which is not that long, maybe it's about 10, 12 minutes long, has literally 13 different parts to it. Tempo changes, one after the other. And I count no less, depending on how you slice and dice it, than 5 climaxes, 5 wonderful climaxes that are simultaneously sexual but also mythical and epic at the same time. Well, it begins this part where he finds her, he keeps calling her, where's my white doe, where is she, where is she? And finally, well, she rises out, just as she did with the same music, a little bit like, sometimes I think he had his eye on Puccini's Bohème or something too, because a lot of the music in the last act, in the last scene, replicates things that you heard at the beginning. But so just as she did in the first act, she emerges, and then her first lines in this final scene are, "Do you know me, love? Do you know who I am?" So the harp would come right before this, actually, and this is the Rusalka motive. So she comes, she appears again, often staged in a kind of diaphanous gown. Do you know who I am? So these come right out of this Rusalka motive. And then we get the first climax where she at first expresses anger at him. Why did you do this to me? How could you have done this? And it's sort of very intense, and there's a climax that he responds to. I don't know if you'd say that's really a quote from Tristan, but after this, her sort of, she's furious at him, and you get this kind of Baroque. So it's a little alla Barocco. You love Baroque music and Bach and things like that. So we suddenly get the principle. And then, sort of right out of Tristan. So these are sort of very, very much Wagner chords coming out after this first climax. He says, I can't live without you. I can't live at all without you. So then I think one of the most beautiful passages, heartbreaking passages in this is when she responds to him and she says, why, as perhaps many have done before her, and alas, many will do in the future, why did you take me in your arms and then lie to me? Why did you lie to me? And so this is what it sounds like. magical chord, which at the beginning was this promise of love, is now the evidence of betrayal. And then we get a second climax, because she's telling him, you can't have me. You know, she doesn't say, get it through your thick princely skull, but if you kiss me, you're going to die. And then I think it's just a devastating, that his sort of princely motives, which are all these kind of, Don Giovanni sort of, sort of musical phalluses in a way, with this bom, 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 sort of fanfares, that they suddenly appear as the most heartbreaking and lovely things, rather than at the beginning where they seem, associated with his conceit and his princely bearing. Here it's utterly devastating as he meets her words, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to be lost, and he says, let me be lost. You'll be lost. He says, kiss me. The next climax comes, and each one in a way gets more powerful and dramatic. You're going to die. Don't do this. And again, he refuses to back away and says, all I want to do is die in your arms. What you should listen for, and this is again very Wagnerian technique, something you hear in Tristan, which is if you listen to the orchestra, it's bum, ba-da-dum, bum, ba-da-dum, bum, the orchestra gradually builds up to this climax, and then she takes over from him. So we have again this, huge climax here with this, and then a little quote from Tristan again. So another reference to this love debt from Tristan. And then we get the fourth climax. The fourth climax is interesting because I just want to point out that, again, this motive, which I've said, a frustrated love, gets faster and faster. And then at the climax, it turns into, it turns this, gets turned upside down, inverted. And so it's as if, I don't think it's all that subtle. It gets turned upside down. So the frustrated love is actually consummated love. I mean, it is a kind of musical orgasm. And it's meant to be, at least, or a spiritual one. It doesn't even matter. But this frustrated love motive, which becomes its opposite. My love, I'm going to kiss you, I must. He's dying. He says, kiss me, kiss me. Yeah, so when he dies, and sort of with these shimmering chords. So again, wonderful. But there's one more climax left, of course, and this is, we'll get to it in a second, but before the climax, we have one more sort of the water sprite, who's like the Greek chorus, comes out and says, "Oh, alas, Rusalka, pale Rusalka, alas, alas," and we hear the magic sleep music for the last time, followed by the Rusalka motive, but now as a funeral march. I can't resist playing the following passage. It's a well-known passage from the Largo of the New World Symphony, where it seems, which is based on, part of it's based on the love of Hiawatha and Minnehaha. It seems like a bit of a rehearsal for Rusalka, because the middle part, the C minor part of the Largo, is most probably based on a passage from Longfellow's Hiawatha, with the death and funeral of Minnehaha. So if you can listen to the similarity between dying, this dying music, I always feel that, again, music does dying a lot better than it does death, because dying is just descent and a lessening of energy. Death requires the funeral march, which is sort of much more of a code, but you'll hear in the New World what this sounds like. Just as in Rusalka, funeral march. And if you look at Dvorak's oeuvre, you'll see lots of funeral marches that sort of give the lie to the happy Dvorak, who maybe fits in with a certain way of writing about music and music history that makes sure that, well, let's say the Germans are serious and the Czechs are fun-loving and like to sing and dance. So Dvorak, I mean, he is fun-loving and he likes to sing and dance, but there's an enormous profundity there. The last climax occurs after the death of the prince. It's a very complex little passage. Rusalka is sort of singing a tribute to the prince, for your wonderful human qualities, for your love, for, let heaven forgive you. And again, we get this frustrated love motive turned around as fulfillment. End of the funeral march, and now Rusalka. Suddenly, final climax. So that's the end of that. And so we have the frustrated love turned around, but sort of want to draw your attention to this. For all your virtues. And then suddenly we get, right, we get, little church music passage, a little chorale, right out of church music, right? So you get, and so this is a tantalizing passage because one could configure the opera as a tale of redemption, that by his act of love, by balancing the scales, by sacrificing himself, by Rusalka's plea that he has somehow ascended to heaven, because after all, the end of the opera, this lovely passage, the prince's tune. So, is that the sound of angels' harps that tells us that the prince has ascended to heaven after all this, that he's not doomed and condemned like Rusalka? Have both of them ascended, or my slightly darker vision of it is that this is just a frame for the piece? That's a frame. It ends it, but the real reality is this terrible tragedy that happens, this Romeo and Juliet, or even Onegin or something where the lovers don't meet and match, and it's a tale of woe and frustration and devastating loss. Why Dvorak came to write this and came to write it the way he did, I don't know, I can't know. But I'll read you one of my favorite passages about Dvorak. And Dvorak was visiting friends in southern Moravia, where these marvelous stone mountains. This is Karol Sazovsky, a friend of his, who recalls this. In the meantime, we, along with Dvorak, have reached the Polavske Hory. "What's that?" said Dvorak. "I never noticed it before. What a curious thing." Well, I told him all I knew about the hills, about where you go to climb them. I mentioned the legends associated with them, but the master no longer seemed to be listening. Knowing his way, I was sure that he was turning something over in his mind, and that in a little while he would come out with something original, the result of his cogitations. I was just beginning to think I had been mistaken, but in a little while the master began. "I always envied Wagner that he could write. Where would I be today if I could write? And I can't speak either. But listen," and he raised his voice, tell it to them straight, but I can't speak. And then he relapsed once more into silence, and for a long time gazed out from the carriage at the Pavlovsky Hory. So it doesn't seem surprising to me that someone who felt that way, who would both use certain devices of Wagner, but use them focused upon perhaps the most profound operatic character who cannot speak, and that his identification with her inability to settle in the human world, inability to speak out, was absolutely profound. And I'll tell you a last little Dvorak anecdote, which is I think also charming, which is when Dvorak got an honorary doctorate at Cambridge. He told a friend, he goes, you know, I got this honorary doctorate, and there were these 20, 30-minute speeches in Latin. And I was so ashamed of myself because I just couldn't understand them. But then I thought a bit, and I said, maybe it's better to have composed the Stabat Mater than it is to know Latin. and I think, you know, Dvorak couldn't speak in the traditional way, but maybe it's better to have composed Rusalka than it is to have written and to have spoken like Wagner. Thank you very much.
Comment on the recording we were listening to, please?
Actually, I think I mixed and matched a couple, but the one I used most was Benyatchkova, which is with Václav Neumann conducting, which is a lovely recording. She was here, as you probably know.
Thank you.
We wanted her to sing, but it wasn't in the cards. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think there are many lovely recordings of Rusalka, and I think you can also hear some wonderful ones upstairs. I think they're still there. Can you listen at the exhibition?
Downstairs.
Sorry. On the second floor, excuse me. There's some early recordings of it. I do think I have a hunch that in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to have some really exceptional Rusalkas as well. Please, yes, thank you.
You made comments and you compared the court scene to Habsburgs, and you mentioned Mozart. Now, the fickle lover in Mozart's opera, Don Giovanni, ends up in hell, right? This fickle lover will go to heaven. Is there some thought behind that?
Well, again, one of the things that we always have to keep in mind, and I have to sort of hit myself with a hammer to remind myself, is that it's only an opera. These aren't real people. So it's not as if we think a certain way, we're going to find out all about these real people. I mean, and what allows one to construct character in an opera, but music in the text. So from Rusalka's point of view, he deserves forgiveness because I think both because he returned and his love was genuine and he was willing to die for his love, something Don Giovanni wouldn't manage in 2,000 years. I don't know. I mean, it would be like, I was thinking, like, what if Butterfly had a fourth act? Madame Butterfly. And so Butterfly tries to kill herself, but Pinkerton comes back in the last fourth act. Pinkerton, who sort of seduced Butterfly and then went off and married somebody else, and Pinkerton was devastated by love and couldn't live without Butterfly, and Butterfly ended up stabbing him at the end. I mean, it's almost like that, and that couldn't happen in Puccini, but I guess my feeling about the Prince is that he has to have been what he was in the first act, because otherwise the transformation couldn't happen. That he is turned into, he's turned into a real human being with the kinds of uncontrollable uncontrollable passions that mark human beings, and that's why Rusalka forgives him. And again, she also seems to understand that he didn't know about the bet. He didn't know that Yeji Baba had a bet going, and he was, in a way, a victim of the bet himself. So again, it's just a character. Dvorak's compassionate music that is given to the prince suggests that if the intention of the composer is part of what you take into consideration in interpreting that the prince is someone who deserves our understanding and perhaps our forgiveness, if you don't go along with the notion that the composer has the right to telegraph intention and that one needs to take a whole range of factors into consideration, then he could be a kind of Pinkerton, and you could view Rusalka herself as the sole victim, and the prince getting his just desserts. Yes, please.
So are you bringing Tristan to maybe be the prince? Is there a comparison between, outside of the music, the character of Tristan being the prince, perhaps, and being frustrated that he can't get...
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, again, I don't think Dvorak modeled it, very specifically, but he knew the opera very well. He used many of the same techniques. The love death does seem to refer, in a way, almost like a pastiche every now and again, to Tristan. And I think he saw parallels between the prince and Tristan, and between Isolde and Rusalka. It gives her that little bit at the end after the prince dies. Of course, Isolde has much more time at the end to sort of develop, but Rusalka, in a very concise package, encapsulates a lot of the Liebestod in that last bit. Thanks. Yes, please.
I just have a general question. Knowing Wagner was heavily influenced by Schopenhauer and his philosophy, especially in writing Tristan and his later operas, Meistersinger and Percival, do you believe that Dvorak could have possibly also been influenced by some kind of philosophy in writing this? I mean, the structure of Tristan, with the lovers going to death, is like a transfiguration for Tristan and both Isolde. Do you think that some kind of similar philosophy could be at play here?
Well, look, when Dvorak said, I can't speak, I can't write, he didn't mean he couldn't think, but I think he meant he didn't read much. So there's no indication to me that this would be anything more than secondhand Schopenhauer through Tristan and through Wagner. I think some of these general ideas were present in the broader culture, and he would have encountered them. I think concepts of death and transfiguration were not alien to him by any means, but he was not a reader, he was not a philosopher, he didn't make any philosophical comments of that nature or speak much about what he was reading. Kovacic, his secretary, and amanuensis while he was in the United States, who kept a very careful diary, which has been recently translated and maybe we're selling, maybe available. Is Maida here?
Not tonight, but next event we will have
okay.
it for sale.
If you read his descriptions of Dvorak's American years, there's almost nothing about Dvorak as a reader of philosophy. He was a reader of libretti, certainly, and I think the Kvapil, who wrote the libretto, probably had a greater familiarity, certainly had a greater familiarity with Wagner's libretti and with contemporary philosophy. So, it may have come to him through the libretto. But unlike Wagner, it wasn't as if he read philosophy and then demanded the libretto. It was probably the opposite, that Kvapil put together a range of sources that were meant to be both local, extremely local, and at the same time sort of more centrally universal in terms of 19th century thought. And again, I think that's a very interesting difference in some ways between this and Tristan, which is, and I didn't speak about it, it would take a longer time, but when Mahler there was a long correspondence between, not long, but some serious correspondence between Dvorak and Mahler, some of which you can see in the exhibit, because it looked as if Rusalka was going to be put on in Vienna and that Mahler was going to conduct it. And it fell through. We don't know exactly why. Mahler at one point said, well, I don't think we would please our audience quite as much as I had thought. And we don't know whether he actually cooled on the opera or there were other political factors involved. But one of the things he wanted to do is there are a couple of conspicuous local color scenes that remind us of Janacek's Cunning Little Vixen, where, yes, it's an animal opera in the forest, except there are these humans who seem to almost be ruining it. They sort of interjecting in various ways, and there are human characters who appear, sort of the cook's helper, the hunter, and Mahler wanted to cut them. Mahler wanted to sort of turn it much more into a universal work, and of course Dvorak had in mind something that was more local. But in answer to your question, there's very little sign that Dvorak was an active philosopher who would have kept up with these. Yes, please.
So would we blame the librettist? It seems to me there's so many references to the ring. Maybe the librettist just inserted them. You have the 3 Rhine Maiden type characters at the beginning. You have this Albrecht type creature coming out of the water. You have the witch who's talking about dragon's blood and mixing things like Mima. You've got, it probably goes on and on afterward, maybe the forest birds or something.
So, look, some of these things are strictly speaking Wagnerian, but in some ways it seems to me that the 3 ladies at the beginning, sure, they share things with the Rhine Maidens, but I think their real antecedent is the magic flute, the sort of more, because they're much more playful in that way. I think the ring is present as well. I think he knew it quite well. No one in the 19th century at that time or the early 20th could have ignored the work. But the legends themselves of the Vodnik, these are sort of parallel European legends that exist in many forms. So, again, the idea of the mermaid, the water nymph, rising out of the waters are things that you find in many operas. But I think you're right. I think Dvorak knew the ring fairly well, even though, as I said, he also was quite ambivalent. If anybody insulted Wagner, he would stick up for Wagner. But he admitted his own ambivalence. He said, well, I'm not a Wagnerian. I'm not a Wagnerite. But this is one of the greatest figures. He once said, he's like the bust of that guy. What's his name? Oh yeah, Homer. What he did, his time may be over, but what he did, nobody before him did, and we have to take it seriously. And somebody once sort of suggested that Wagner drank too much. And Dvorak, who could be a little bit irascible, sort of apparently turned on him and said, hey, listen, black on white, no matter how much you drank, you couldn't write anything nearly as good. But yes, it's filled with Wagner, but also filled with Smetana. It's filled with American reminiscences as well. Thank you. Yes?
In the present production at the Met, at the end, after the prince dies, she takes his overcoat that had been discarded and puts it on. And I'm not sure how to interpret that. Is there anything in the music that would...
No, I mean, that's, it's directors. I mean, it's very hard to figure out what is supposed to happen at an opera in a way. Because one thing, there is a story, there's an idea that a director could be true to, but a director is also responsible for creating indelible stage images, whether or not they, strictly speaking, make sense. I'll give you a funny example. I saw a production of Janacek's from the House of the Dead. For whatever reason, the opera takes place in a prison, and the director had obviously obviously seen every single prison break drama on American television where there's some kind of rape every 30 seconds, and it was very sexualized production. But the third act, all the prisoners are suddenly dressed as if they were chorus in tuxedos and white tie, and the last image of the great image of the House of the Dead is that there's a bird who's been sort of tortured and, captured by the prisoners. And finally, at the end of the act, the bird is let go. And everyone sings, the eagle is the czar of the forest. And it was very funny because I had met a French couple in a restaurant before. I had extra tickets because I was taking students. And I just went up to these strangers and said, do you want to see this opera? They said, yeah, sure, we'd love to go. So I told them the story about the bird, but in this production, there was no bird. It was an upside-down Steinway piano. That at the moment they're singing, the eagle is the czar of the forest, that it was raised up to the ceiling, an upside-down piano. So of course these French people looked at me as if I were a moron. I'm supposed to be an expert in the opera, and I told them it was a bird and it's clearly an upside-down piano. But the point is that it was a pretty stunning image. It had, in a way, it didn't have that much to do with the opera, but it was a stunning stage image, and I think that thing with the jacket is a beautiful stage image. It could mean many things. I suppose if you think that art isn't Twitter messages, but that these are things that are meant to ask questions, raise issues, create images that are themselves powerful, which along with sound cause us to think new thoughts, then fine. I mean, there are many different interpretations of it, but that she and the prince are somehow together, that they've gone to heaven, that she's cold. Well, because the whole thing is that she's cold. Pale Rusalka, you're so cold, and now she's warm. Isn't that the end of the poem, right? When Mimi gets the muff, and now I'm warm, and then it's off to dreamland. Yes, please.
I just want to congratulate you. I think your love of music is infectious. I am a conductor, and we have declining audiences all over the world. I wish I could clone you and have you speak before every one of not only my performances, but everybody's performances. I think you're really extraordinary.
Well, that's very good.